Right, let's jump straight into this explainer and honestly, just demystify the complex world of economics by building it from the absolute ground up. Whether you're scanning the morning headlines or just trying to manage your own household budget, understanding how the actual gears of the global economy turn, that's an absolute superpower. So today, we're going to build your ultimate user's manual to the economy.
Our roadmap today is perfectly designed to zoom out, starting from our individual choices all the way up to those massive global theories. We'll start with the science of choices, hit micro versus macro perspectives, learn how to read the economic dashboard, explore 5 historical economic systems, and finish up with the 3 major economic theories.
So, Section 1, the science of choices, anchoring the basics. At its core, economics is a social science. It studies exactly how individuals, businesses, governments, and entire nations make decisions about allocating limited resources. So the absolutely crucial takeaway here is that economics isn't just math, right? It's fundamentally the study of human decision-making. It looks at how goods and services are produced, distributed, and consumed, and how every single one of those choices ripples out to affect society and government policy.
And this brilliantly illustrates the core tension of our everyday lives. It's the classic tug of war. On one side, we've got human desires, which are, let's face it, practically unlimited. We kind of want everything. But on the other side, our actual available goods and services are strictly limited. Because of this massive imbalance, economists study how societies are forced to allocate these scarce resources, because, as we all know, every single decision has a trade-off.
Now, while these ideas about scarcity and trade have been floating around for literally thousands of years, modern economics is usually traced directly back to Adam Smith, specifically his seminal 1776 book, The Wealth of Nations. This was the text that truly helped shape contemporary Western economic theory exactly as we know it today.
Which brings us to Section 2, micro versus macro perspectives, zooming in and out. You can basically think of microeconomics as studying the individual trees, while macroeconomics is looking at the health of the entire forest. Micro zooms way in. It analyzes how a single person, a household, or maybe one specific business makes financial decisions. It looks at the nitty-gritty of supply and demand, how we respond to price changes, and how individuals handle risk. Macroeconomics, on the flip side, zooms all the way out. It looks at the behavior and performance of the economy as a whole. Stuff like foreign trade, total production output, and national unemployment rates.
And when we zoom out to that macro level, we start to see these recurring cycles of growth and decline that actually affect every single one of us. Macroeconomics tracks these business cycles heavily. We're talking about the expansions where the economy is growing, the booms where it peaks, the recessions where it starts to pull back, and the depressions where it severely contracts. By using aggregate indicators, economists can build models to help navigate these massive waves and formulate strategies to get us through them safely.
To measure all of this, we move to Section 3, reading the economic dashboard, dials and gauges. Think of economists as mechanics reading a nation's dashboard. They study the relationship between a society's raw resources and its actual output. And their opinions, along with the data they track, help shape everything: interest rates, tax laws, employment programs, you name it. These indicators are published periodically, and they have a massive, massive effect on stocks, employment, and global markets. They don't just tell us where we currently are, they actually help predict future conditions. So what are the primary gauges we should be looking at? Well, here is your cheat sheet for the daily news. First up, gross domestic product, or GDP. This is the absolute broadest measure of performance. It calculates the total market value of all finished goods and services produced in a country in a single year. Interestingly, it's considered a lagging indicator, which means it confirms trends rather than predicting them. Second, we have the Consumer Price Index, or CPI. This measures retail price changes using a representative basket of goods, and it acts as our main benchmark for inflation. And third, non-farm payrolls. Released on the first Friday of each month, this data shows us the exact health of the job market, where sharp increases generally signal prosperous growth. Now, if you want to know what actually drives that massive GDP number, it all comes down to consumer spending. When the government reports on retail sales in the middle of each month, it is absolutely crucial. Why? Because consumer spending, just everyday people like you and me buying merchandise in stores, makes up a staggering 2/3 of the entire gross domestic product. Sampling these retailers acts as a proxy for consumer spending levels, making it one of the single most useful ways to gauge the general direction of the whole economy.
Meanwhile, tracking how much of our factories and mines are just sitting idle tells us if we're facing inflationary pressure or economic weakness.
The Federal Reserve releases a monthly report on industrial production, and a key measure here is the capacity utilization rate. Basically, if it's incredibly high, it means we're using almost all our productive capacity, which can signal supply constraints and upcoming inflation. But if those levels are low, it means factories are sitting idle, and that points directly to economic weakness or excess capacity.
But how do societies choose to organize all these resources in the first place? Let's look at Section 4, 5 Historical Economic Systems, the Societal Rulebooks.
Looking back through history, we can trace a pretty clear evolution of 5 distinct systems used to allocate resources to meet people's needs. We move from primitivism to feudalism in the 9th to 15th centuries, into capitalism with the Industrial Revolution, and then into the modern era with the development of both socialism and communism. We started out with families producing their own basic necessities in primitive agrarian societies, building their own dwellings, growing crops, hunting, all at the household level. Then society shifted to feudalism, where lords held the land and leased it to peasants for production in exchange for physical safety. But it was the Industrial Revolution that truly flipped the script, paving the way for the incredibly complex market structures we navigate today. Capitalism emerged as a system where private business owners organize resources, things like tools, workers, and raw materials, for market consumption. It relies entirely on the dynamics of supply and demand to set prices in the open market. And it's all driven, of course, by the incentive of earning profits. Under this system, the optimal valuation of resources naturally emerges from individual desires colliding with scarcity. Conversely, as societies continue to evolve, alternative systems were proposed. Socialism operates as a form of cooperative production that utilizes limited or hybrid private ownership. Here, prices, profits, and losses aren't the sole determining factors for what to produce or how to produce it. Communism goes a step further, holding that all economic activities should be completely centralized. This relies heavily on the coordination of state-sponsored central planners, along with common ownership of both production and distribution. Which brings us to our final stop, Section 5. 3 major economic theories, the driving philosophies. As markets have grown and changed over time, 3 distinct schools of thought, neoclassical, Keynesian, and Marxian, have really emerged as the foundational philosophies for modern economic policy. Each of these theories views the relationship between individuals, markets, and governments through a fundamentally different lens. While neoclassical theory largely trusts free markets to find a perfect equilibrium just through the sheer volume of supply and demand, Keynesian economics takes a very different approach. Developed by John Maynard Keynes during the Great Depression, this theory argues against that pure neoclassical view. Keynes showed that restrained markets and actual government intervention are necessary to create stability. He heavily advocated for using monetary policy to boost demand and investor confidence, specifically during economic downturns. And then, presenting a complete rejection of that free market classical view, we have Marxian economics, famously defined in Karl Marx's work Das Kapital. This theory completely rejects the idea that an economic system determined purely by supply and demand benefits society as a whole. Instead, Marxian economics argues that capitalism inherently enriches a ruling class by extracting value from the cheap labor provided by the working class. So now that you have the user's manual to the global economy, you know the indicators, the historical systems, and the theories, the ultimate question is this. When you look at the news tonight, which dials on the dashboard are actually moving and which underlying theory is steering the wheel of those policy decisions? Next time you see a report on GDP or a heated debate on interest rates, you'll know exactly what's going on under the hood. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning the data.